Let's continue with the discussion on the endogenous growth theory. That's actually back in the 1980s, and then now it's almost it's 40 years later, and then we haven't made much progress. Like I said, there are two problems with the endogenous growth theory. One is that don't leave out the exogenous variables, right? Uh, Growth can be made or promoted by both in exogenous and endogenous. Okay, so instead of looking at the research and development, look at the human resources, look at the education, patent, those kind of things. And we need to look at the exogenous. But this is not a major issue because a lot of times later, over the 40 years of the development, a lot of the scholars have done the work to endogenize the exogenous variable. A good example is two. One is that the population growth used to be like, exogenous, right? It's a determined outside the model, and we can't really have much control, you know. And another variable is the state policies, right? But now over times we see a lot of variables has been endogenized, meaning that they become more and more internal variable. Well, by the way, when we say endogenous, basically means three things. Number one, what is the origin? Where is the variable coming from? If it's coming from outside of the system, outside the model, typically it's exogenous. If it's coming inside the model, typically it's endogenous. Okay, and the second thing is that controllability. If you have the control of the variable, then it's endogenous. If not, it's exogenous. And then number three is the causality. If it's a input variable put on the right hand side of the equation, typically the exogenous. If it's on the left hand side, as the dependent variable, that's endogenous. But this has been changed. A lot of, like I said, a lot of previously exogenous variable has been endogenized, meaning that we are thinking more and more moving them from the left hand side to the right hand side, to make them partially, if not completely, endogenous variables. Meaning, the good example, I said earlier that the birth fertility rate and government policies, those are, you could make them endogenous variables. So this is kind of a boring issue, but I'm just saying, in the future, we may have a lot of variables where we can, on the both sides of the equations, we may have endogenous variables. If it's a clear cut like before, the left hand side is a dependent variable, right hand side is an independent variable, and then basically that means that you can apply uh, ordinary least square statistically. And again, this is a boring issue, but let me get to the interesting issue pretty soon. So you can use the different, method like two-stage least square, which use, the instrument variables and, simultaneous equations, structural variables. Those are things, that's a statistical way of doing this. But what I'm emphasizing is what a lot of uh, the exogenous and endogenous variable is, you could say endogenous growth theory has been kind of overlooked in many exogenous variable. But uh, we give some credit to the later development in the endogenous growth theory because a lot of scholars have been doing this to make some exogenous variable into endogenous variable. So this is the latest trend, but one another thing that remains. The endogenous variable. I haven't seen many scholars to to emphasize in the same um, importance of the both supply side and the demand side. Okay, when we say that the endogenous variable, they have been emphasizing the research and development, knowledge occupation, knowledge accumulation, and how many degrees, how many people have the engineering degrees versus like the guy was saying that the American is an attorney state and then China is an engineering state. That's a typical supply side thinking. Okay, what has been overlooked is the demand side. That's the biggest issue that we need to fix on. Okay, so let's stop talking about the abstract. Let's talk about the China. We have to understand the China. You can't really just using the supply side of things. Look at how many people have engineering degrees. Again, you remember I said the example that Iran. Look at the country of Iran. Among the young people, 90% have degrees, but that's the supply side. Okay, the demand side. We need some people to create enterprises, companies, and entrepreneurship. So to create a demand to absorb those people with a college degree. Otherwise, you have an imbalance. You basically have a problem of over education. So that's not good. So here again, I want to emphasize. I'm going to do the more details tomorrow. I want to emphasize here is that to understand China, you really need to understand not just the supply side, but also the demand side. Let's stop here.